Hello, everyone. My name is Ciara May. I'm a founder member of ISPA with the goal of creating and supporting community for those who work in behavioural science and as a way to ensure high standards of practice for all those who use behaviour analytic services in Ireland. I've also had the pleasure of working with Brian for the first 8 years of my life as a behaviour therapist, and I'm honoured to be in a position to introduce him here this evening. Dr. Brian McClean is a qualified clinical psychologist from the University of Surrey, which he qualified from in 1989. In 1994, he founded the Callan Institute for Behavioural Support and developed it as a national consultation and training agency. Over 30 years, Brian has helped to develop more than 1,000 multi-element behaviour support plans for people with behaviours of concern. In addition to clinical and national policy contributions, Dr. McClean is a dedicated researcher and educator. His work inspires and guides many in the behaviour support community worldwide towards ensuring that people not only have their human rights upheld, but also experience relationship, connection, and belonging. Brian currently works with Acquired Brain Injury Ireland in the Irish Midlands, whose mission is to enable people with neuro-rehabilitation needs to live the lives of their choosing. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Brian now, who will talk with us about a relationship-based approach to positive behaviour support. Here you go, Brian.
Thank you so much, Ciara. It's a real honour to have this opportunity. And thanks to Alan Tennyson as well. Hello, everybody. I used to believe that disability rights was going to be the last great civil rights movement of the 20th century. If the 19th century was the era of national rights and national identity, the 20th century perhaps was the era of civil rights. I had those thoughts in the halcyon days, pre-Trump, pre-2016, pre the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the destruction of Gaza. Perhaps the civil rights agenda is more difficult to cling to now, but I passionately believe in positive behaviour support as the way of ensuring that people have not only equality of opportunity, but actually have equity in outcome. When we think about equal opportunity, we think about natural consequences applying to behavior. We think about people with acquired brain injury having prison sentences. We think about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs being called illegal and immoral discrimination and a public waste. That a quote from one Donald J. Trump in January 2025. Positive behavior support is what provides people with the support they need to overcome barriers to inclusion, so that people with disabilities can overcome behavior and live the lives of their choosing, have a participation in community and valued social roles. And we promote justice. We oppose ableism whenever we can. But the idea of true justice without barriers for people with disability probably requires a system that is different from the meritocracy of capitalism. My quibble with positive behavior support as solely a human rights agenda is that the achievement of civil rights is hollow if we don't have a loving relationship to come home to. It's not that the achievement of rights is not important, but that loving relationships are the core or are the platform for any achievement of civil rights. I've never seen a marriage resolve or a relationship, a marital conflict improve just because the participants are able to articulate and advocate for their human rights. It's important that the participants in a conflict are able to do that. But the resolution of conflict, I think, requires much more. I think it requires other things as well, like mutual understanding. I don't often hear parents describe behaviors of concern as a conflict of human rights. Far more often, parents describe their homes as war zones. And so I had hoped that the great achievement of the 21st century would be the achievement of a methodology for conflict resolution, going beyond human rights to a process by which enemies can start to occupy the psychological skin of each other, see the world from each other's point of view, and make peace, which is different from ceasefire. It's a peace that involves a reconciliation of opposing points of view. That's what I would hope positive behavior support would achieve in the lives of families and of people who have behaviors of concern. One of the great peacemakers was a man by the name of Sergio Vieira de Mello, a prominent humanitarian, a troubleshooter. He was the third UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Ireland is very proud of the fact that the second UN High Commissioner for Human Rights was the former President, Mary Robinson. Samantha Power describes Vieira de Mello as a cross between James Bond and Bobby Kennedy. He was a brilliant negotiator. Examples of his negotiation successes include securing the return of 370,000 Cambodian refugees, negotiating blue routes that brought aid to 350,000 residents of the besieged Sarajevo. He negotiated successfully with a range of mass murderers, including the Khmer Rouge and Balkan leaders such as Slobodan Milosevic. So I'm going to tell you a story about Vieira de Mello. It was June 1999. It was the tail end of a brutal war in Kosovo that involved ethnic cleansing and mass internment and snipers from building tops terrorizing citizens. Slobodan Milosevic, the leader of Serbia, submitted to NATO, and one day later, the UN appointed Vieira de Mello as interim head of the government of Kosovo. But there was still a war on. The Serbian army and police units were looting and torching property. And de Mello believed that the UN needed to act quickly. He arrived in Pristina with a convoy of vital aid, food and supplies, tents, and arrived only to find that the warehouse that they were all to be stored in was blocked. A guard began screaming obscenities and raising his machine gun as if to shoot them as they approached. The man was visibly drunk, incoherent, and dangerous. Standard stuff for positive behavior support. The Serbs had already burned down the other large UN warehouse in Kosovo. So de Mello knew that they really needed to hang on to this one. He turned to his aide and said, "I need a stiff drink." The aide was frightened. "What do you mean you need a drink?" It was broad daylight, and there was lots of work to be done. But a few minutes later, the locals approached with a small bottle of Balkan brandy. Vieira de Mello approached the angry Serb cautiously and pointed to the bottle. "I would like to drink some brandy with you and talk things out," he said. The Serb guard looked skeptical. But the Balkan rules of hospitality required him to accept. He rested his gun beside the chair and returned the toast. The Serb began explaining the source of his rage. He'd been guarding the UN warehouse for almost a year and he hadn't been paid. He and de Mello finished the drink, DeMello returns to his vehicle, dipped into a tin box that he used to store petty cash. When he handed the Serb the several $100s that he was owed, the guard pocketed the money, picked up his gun, and walked away. The warehouse belonged to the UN. I think if we look at this deceptively simple story, we can draw important lessons from a master negotiator. I believe that in this negotiation, he engaged the person and he found common ground. He built trust incrementally and he worked hard to break down barriers to communication. He kept a focus on the goal. He managed his own emotions and he listened for the real message in the behavior. I believe that these are the same steps in resolving conflict of any kind. And so in this workshop, I'm going to propose a language for talking about positive behavior support. Positive behavior support has always been a neuro-affirming way of working. If it's not neuro-affirming, it's not positive behavior support. But I want to go further than that. I want a relationship-based agenda for positive behavior support. More than anything, I want to attempt a cultural translation of what we mean by positive behavior support so that it is effective, but available and accessible to the people who are there in sufficient number to implement it. Available and accessible in kitchens, in living rooms, available to parents and family members. And to do this, we must strip it of its jargon and speak it in a plain language so that everybody has access to it and can understand. So, what do I mean by positive behavior support? I think positive behavior support involves 5 very, very important tasks. The first is to get a comprehensive understanding of the support needs of the person. Not labels and diagnoses, but actually information on how to help. Information about the cognitive, physical, sensory, communicational, family, environment, health, and motivational factors that may set the occasion for the behavior, but certainly allow us to understand how this person can be supported. The second thing I mean by positive behavior support is it's a listening. It's an attempt to use any information available to understand what the message of behavior is. Thirdly, it's a multi-element plan. It's a plan that attempts to accommodate the person by adapting the environment to get a better fit with needs and characteristics. It's an attempt to empower the person, typically by helping the person communicate their message more effectively. It's a plan for intervening if necessary, and it's a plan for responding to behavior when it occurs in a way that is that restores safety and resolves conflict, and in a way that allows us to survive together with as much dignity as we can. The fourth thing that I think positive behavior support does is it equips supporters. It is a process of engaging a group of stakeholders around a common goal and then evoking from them the ways in which the ideas that they have and the capacities they have for a plan to support this person. Finally, I think it's indispensable that we would monitor the implementation of the plan and also monitor the outcome, whether it's actually working for us or not. And so what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is attempt a cultural translation of positive behavior support. At its heart, positive behavior support involves a very important distinction between the time and energy that we spend on things that are going wrong and the time and energy that we spend in helping things go right. As many of us here know, how we choose our words to respond when things are going wrong is very important. And having a plan for what to do when things are going wrong can prevent things from getting further out of control and turning a minor skirmish into a war. I have a long-standing interest in sieges, these classic standoffs, these classic conflicts that are a meeting of equal and opposite forces. A Rand Corporation study of 1,000 hostages killed found that 75% die as a result of the rescue attempt. And I find it very interesting to contrast this with another study that looked at every hostage-taking situation in a 5-year period where trained negotiators were used. And in that study, none of those hostage situations resulted in a hostage being harmed. So what does a trained negotiator do in this classic standoff that's different from what a SWAT team or an attempt at direct control would do? Positive behavior support has a long history in developing creative, non-linear responses to these kinds of conflict situations. Responses like active listening, like paraphrasing, like redirection, like strategic capitulation. And we do this in order to survive together with dignity. The point of this model is that most of my time and energy should be spent on helping things that go right. Helping things go right means teaching and communicating. There are many lovely emerging examples of this. I love the work of Ross Green on collaborative and proactive solutions, which sees the situations in which problems arise as skills lagging for problem solving. The person hasn't developed the skill, usually the communication skill, for solving the problem of the situation, and behavior fills the gap. And so in a situation where somebody is presenting with a behavior of concern, we try and move from a judgmental mindset to a curiosity. We try and change the labels with which we understand from willful and defiant to an understanding of the pressure or stress that a person may be under. And we try and see the situation in terms of the skill that the person needed in that situation in order to resolve the problem. We have a long history of these constructive, creative approaches to resolving behaviors of concern, stemming back to Israel Gold Diamond in 1974 and nonlinear contingency analysis in 2009. Gary Lavigne's work, since I first met him in 1988, has really been a rich source of ideas around in not counterintuitive, creative solutions to the situations in which behaviors of concern arise. Our skills as teachers, our communicators, are only ever as good as our ability to listen and learn. A skilled teacher will learn more from a situation of teaching than that which that teacher imparts. And there are many lovely frameworks that allow us to listen and allow us to learn. For example, Mary Doherty's framework for understanding autism as a set of needs: sensory needs, need for predictability, a need for acceptance as a unique individual, a need for adapted communication sometimes, and a need for empathy. The requirement for physical space, processing space, and emotional space. It's a lovely framework for listening and learning to autism. My own work involves a 5-step process that I go through when I'm getting started on positive behavior support, trying to understand the arousal level of the person and their ability to self-soothe, and looking to see if the person is in rapport, if others act, if others speak, does that register, does that land with the person? Because everything we do subsequently, assuming a low arousal environment, everything we try and do is as good as the rapport that we have with the individual in that moment. Once we have that rapport, we can start to build expectation and predictability and have a common focus and common ground. And that sets the occasion for teaching an incentive if it's required. But the sequence of this approach is what's important. We've always worked in this kind of way. The behavior assessment guide is the attempt to understand the text of behavior in terms of multiple contexts, understanding behavior in terms of its cognitive context, its sensory context, its communicational context, understanding this behavior now in the context of the life story or in the context of the environment in which the behavior is seen, understanding behavior in terms of its health and medical context, understanding behavior in terms of the motivational context that the person brings. And in this way, understanding text that needs to be understood in terms of its context makes a comprehensive behavioral assessment is actually an act of empathy. The more information I have, the more able I am to imagine the world of the person, the more able I am to step inside the psychological skin of the person and see things from their point of view. And this may allow me a better starting point for the process of resolving the conflicts that people find themselves in. Ted Carr said it from the start of positive behavior support, that one of the central messages of positive behavior support is that we're putting our effort into fixing problem contexts, not problem behaviors. My ability to listen and learn is only as good as the relationship that I can forge with the person. It's enriched by the relationship. It's helped by the relationship. I'm not talking necessarily about my relationship with the individual. What I'm talking about more often is the relationship of the helper, usually the parent or the teacher or the staff member. Their relationship with the individual is what is effective in helping. The point here, the point of this model is that problems at any level in this pyramid are resolved at lower levels. Problems with teaching and communicating are resolved with listening and learning. Problems with listening and learning are resolved by examining the relationship, the emotions between people. I first heard about positive behavior support from Gary Lavigne when I went to a training that he provided in Oxford in 1988. And this was the era of the shoelace wars. Somebody that I was asked to do an assessment on as a trainee, his name was Jeremy. And he wouldn't refrain from taking people's shoelaces and tying them round his fingers. And so the staff in the lock ward where he lived wouldn't refrain from putting him in seclusion in response to this behavior. And to my horror, I saw that he would be in the seclusion room 21, 22 hours out of 24. There was a little mattress in there and he slept in there. And staff would bring him meals to the seclusion room and then use the opportunity to correct him. No, no, Jeremy, these are my shoelaces. But each day from Monday to Friday, this big guy by the name of Paul, with this, all I can remember is he had this mad red hair, an Irish guy. And he'd come to the locked ward, and the door would be unlocked and he'd be brought in, and then the door of the seclusion room would be open and Jeremy's shoes would be found and his laces would be tied. And Jeremy and Paul went walking in the town every day for about 45 minutes. I was learning nothing from the big file I was asked to read. And so I tagged along. And I'd say I learned more in that than I had learned in hours of lectures on positive behavior support, or hours of lectures in clinical psychology, I should say. Because what I saw was empathy. What I saw was Paul seeing the world from Jeremy's point of view, noticing if Jeremy looked at a truck passing by, noticing if Jeremy was smiling, using his words as scaffolding for Jeremy's experience, saying to Jeremy with words and with actions, I hear you, I see you, I'm with you. It was a wonderful experience for me to see. What we're talking about when we're talking about relationships is we're talking about the skilled helper. And I'm actually on very, very safe ground with this, because no matter what research you look at on the effectiveness of helping, we have one very robust finding. Therapy is effective. Helping is effective, but the type of therapy is not the factor in its effectiveness. The theoretical basis is not the factor. The strictness of adherence to the techniques is not the factor that determines effectiveness. We all know in clinical psychology that the thing that counts, the bit that makes us effective as helpers, is the relationship between the helper and the person they're trying to help. In my example here, the relationship between the mum and her 16-year-old daughter. I'll go further and we can define that relationship. It means that there are affectionate and trusting feelings. It means that they are motivated towards each other. It means that they are capable of empathic responding. Under those conditions, the effort to help is effective. And everything we should be doing in services should be attempting to enhance those factors, not replace them, not supplant them, not get in their way, but actually work hard to build those factors, putting our energy into the things that help things go right. The question, how can I help, is one of the most noble and beautiful questions that a human being can ask of another. But I do believe that helping has a shadow side, that certain styles or certain forms of helping are actually doing more harm than good. Rosbeth Moss Cantor, a Harvard academic, she puts it beautifully when she says, when we do change to people, they experience it as violence. But when people do change for themselves, they experience it as liberation. Cormac Russell talks about the 4 unintended harms of expert help. When an expert helps, no matter how needed that help is, it defines the person helped by their deficiencies. When we put our resources into top-down expert styles of helping, the resources end up going to the professionals and the experts rather than to the people who the resources were intending to help. When an expert comes in and tells me how to fix something, my self-reliance retreats. And so people and families become dependent on the rescuers. They internalize this map that says, my child will not be okay if he doesn't have 6 sessions of speech and language therapy or occupational therapy or a behavior analyst. And in understanding disability and understanding the world that way, the self-reliance of the parent retreats and shrinks. Why are families ending up feeling like they need to fight endlessly for services? I think it's because of the big lie. And I think in positive behavior support, we need to step down from the big lie. The big lie is the one that says your child will be able to speak if he has enough speech and language therapy, but sadly, I can't give it to you. Your child will be able to appear as normal if she has enough behavior analysis or if she has enough occupational therapy. The idea that if we had enough professionals, we could fix your child and make your disabled child into a non-disabled one. There is no outcome data in the world that supports that contention. And there are not and never will be enough professionals. Even if resources were doubled, if resources were, there will never be enough professionals in sufficient number to solve the problems that families of people with disabilities have. The only people who are there in sufficient number and who are there in sufficient love and concern for their child are parents. And that's where the solutions need to lie, and services need to configure themselves, not as the expert the child away for 6 sessions of therapy, but as the people who support and inform and coach and train and engage parents to be the solutions for their children. Our ability to build alliances with the network around the family is crucial to the capacity of services to support the central relationships with the people involved. And so, as practitioners of positive behavior support, what feels really, really important to me in our training, in our supervision, in our support of each other is that we're not only skilled in understanding behavior and contingencies, but we're actually able to build relationships with people, that we're actually able to engage people in a collaborative relationship, a relationship that's based on listening and learning, empathizing, accepting what we find, accepting what we hear, and collaborating. And with that engagement, finding common ground, using and spending time identifying the person's goals, identifying the family's goals, and then evoking in all stakeholders their ability to change, their motivation for change of it to them, their confidence in their ability to change, and bringing stakeholders together to plan next steps. This motivational interviewing. And I think the principles that guide motivational interviewing are the principles that guide positive behavior support. The importance of coming alongside, of feeling with, of empathizing, the importance of accepting the absolute worth of the child and the absolute worth of this family, their autonomy, their right to self-govern and decide what's best for them, and our role in affirming them. The principle of forming collaborative relationships and the principle of evoking the capacities of the child and of the family in the plan that we design together. In order to do that, I must have a heart at peace. I must be able to be questioned in the war zone and still be at peace with myself. My favorite study in all of psychology is a study of 3 adults with profound and multiple intellectual disabilities. These 3 adults don't speak using words, need help for every activity of daily living. And the study involved spending time with the 3 adults to count the number of times that they displayed indications of happiness, the number of times that they smiled, giggled, made eye contact, pointed. And then the study trained these adults in mindfulness. I was so excited when I read this study. I wrote immediately to Norbeh Singh and I asked him to give me the magical script for the mindfulness practice that the carers undertook. Very graciously, he wrote back to me with the script for a very ordinary mindfulness practice, 8 minutes, mindfulness of breath. It's a regular standard practice in mindfulness. The carers learned how to do the mindfulness, they were trained, and then they logged their daily practice in this short mental health care routine. The researchers came back some weeks later and counted again the indications of happiness in the 3 adults with the profound and multiple intellectual disabilities, found increases of 150, 250%. Why? These 3 adults wouldn't have even been aware that a study was taking place. How has this simple training for carers been associated with an hugely important increase in happiness behaviors among the 3 adults? There are many reasons, but the natural state of the human being is a heart at peace. It's when we are available to social engagement, when we are experiencing a sense of joy, when we're living in the present, when we're grounded, when we're curious and open, it's when we can be compassionate and mindful. That's the heart at peace. When behaviors of concern arise, the person goes into the war zone, we go into the war zone. It's fight or flight, it's worry, it's concern, it's frustration. It might even be mild irritation, but it takes us away from the heart of peace. It's when we choose the wrong cue in SuperValue. It's when a teenager turns to her dad and says, "Do not touch the stuff that's lying around my floor, the dirty cups and the dirty dishes, and I will not talk about it." It's when a colleague turns to us and says, "I don't like positive behavior support because it's not neuro-affirming." These are the things that can threaten to take us away from the heart at peace. And we're only as effective in our ability at the higher levels of the pyramid um, when we are able to return or restore the heart. So the point of my model is that most of my time and energy should be spent on helping things go right. That problems at any level of the pyramid are resolved at lower, deeper levels. And that ultimately my effectiveness level in the pyramid depends on my effectiveness at the lowest level, my ability to restore the heart of peace. This wasn't my model. This is a model that comes from peacekeeping literature and leadership literature. It's the work of the Arbinger Institute, and I've just applied it to positive behavior support. Because I believe that what we're doing is not just a endeavor, it's a peacemaking conflict resolution endeavor. Great, there's been a proliferation of based approaches, and I'm really excited, and it's a great time to be working in positive behavior support. Last month, the NCSE produced a wonderful document called Relate, which is a relationship-based approach for reframing behavior in the classroom. And it advocates recognizing behavior as communication. This has been our mantra for decades. Recognizing stressors and understanding the influence of the environment, although stressors are the main source of behaviors of concern, they're by no means the only one. Finding intrinsic motive, reducing barriers, changing the environment to increase well-being, collecting data on why behavior is happening, examining stressors and occurrences in the day. This is a lovely manifesto for positive behavior support. Leading with strengths, remaining solution focused, focusing on when behaviors don't happen. If we can identify the people, places, times, and activities where behaviors don't happen, we've designed our support plan. Emphasizing the importance of connection and doing things with students, making change at a universal level that's consistent and sustainable in the long term. But I wonder, is there any, in embracing this new kind of relationship-based frame for positive behavior support, is there any danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater? What are we losing as well as what we are gaining? The full table, the Relate document, talks about a shift from to a relationship-based approach. So a shift from seeing behavior as something to manage. If I'm working with somebody who's detached their retina by punching themselves in the eye, then their behavior is something to be managed as I recognize it as a communication. Shifting away from hypothesizing functions of behavior, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. A statement of function of behavior is a bringing together of all of the understandings of the support needs of the person and the message of behavior. I can't do without a comprehensive statement of function. Relying on reinforcement through rewards, it's an option for me. In war zones, I try not to rule out options. I try to generate as many good options as I can. It's not a strong option for me. Changing behaviors. I want to change behaviors. I want to change the environments in which behaviors occur. Collecting data on what's happening and defining together the problem. These are essentials in a peacekeeping process. But I think we need to build bridges, not barriers. We have been advocates of a human rights approach for decades. And it has been a huge surprise for ourselves in the last few years as practitioners in positive behavior support to find ourselves embattled and under siege. I think that our response to this critique of positive behavior support should be to embrace it, should be to listen and learn, should be to build relationships and alliances, should be the ability to step outside our own assumptions and be able to return the heart to peace so that we can promote a growing, evolving capacity to support children and adults with behaviors of concern.